Good day, chess world. So we're back again with the exploration of the book Logical Chess Move by Move as we break down each individual game and look and learn from the big themes that we can take from them. And we're busy with the early part of the book, which is all based on the Kingside attack, focusing on the enemy king position once it is castled short and how we can look to target that. In today's game, is a wonderful example, again, of how to exploit someone moving the pawn next to their king position early on and how we can potentially get at that. So we saw in game one and game two the same theme where it was white who'd pushed their pawn, h pawn, to h3 and made a weakness. And we saw in game one how he exploited that, black in this case, exploited that attack with pieces. Game two, we saw how it was a pawn storm combining with the pieces to use that weakness. Now, this game is white, again using black, making that mistake of weakening their king side, weakening that pawn that is there. So this game was played by Blackburn back in 1891. And the beginning of the game is a very popular opening back in the 1800s, the King's Gambit. It's fallen a little bit out of fashion in modern times, but still a wonderful weapon. So it starts with e4, king pawn game, e5, then f4. Now, this is the beginning of the King's Gambit. They are gambiting the pawn on the king side here. Now, all gambits are built on time. You are either giving up a pawn or material so that you can gain time for development, or giving up pawn material to gain time for control of the center. And the King's Gambit is actually built on that theme, where white would like black to take out of the center so that they can look to build up through the middle. Now, of course, typically the King's Gambit accepted, we will see in some games later on, and we'll see how that's unpacked. And there the idea is white would develop and look to take over the middle with d4. Very interesting line. So here we get bishop to c5. This is a counter gambit. Temporarily, we have this moment where black is giving back the opportunity to white to say, go ahead, take my pawn, be my guest. But of course, that would be a very poor move, because now if pawn takes, and we see the problem, queen will go check, g3, queen takes e4 check, and suddenly, oh no, very embarrassing situation for white, as they will lose their rook in the corner. So whenever we see the pawn moving f2 to f4 or f7 to f5, black can sometimes play in certain openings in the king pawn game. We are seeing the weakening, as we can see, of this diagonal of e1 to h4, or this one a7 to g1. So very clever by black. They play bishop c5. They're trying to use both. White's intention here is, let me keep developing, mobilize pieces, knight to c3. So black plays knight to c6, and once again, simple development is the path in this case, where white then brings out their knight. Good. Remember, in the opening, focus on mobilizing pieces. Don't focus on winning material. Black here, as we will see, plays not a blunder, but what we would call an inferior move. What black should do here is to play their pawn to d6. The intention is to re-stabilize their center so that if the pawn were to capture, they can replace a pawn with a pawn. But instead, they play here. This pawn takes out of the middle. And this is the intended idea of the King's Gambit, because now white can spring forth with two pawns in the center. And this was exactly as white intended. They've distracted black's only center pawn. Only pawn for black that was sitting in the middle, giving black space, is now gone. And suddenly white has this wonderful center. We call it a classical center. Bishop b4. Now the bishop takes back on f4, as we'll see. A fine move, developing the bishop, winning back material. And here, black does something very instructive. They understand that they need space. They need to fight for the middle, and they use their pawn to do it. Pawn to d5. Okay, here Blackburn takes a decision to close the center when I actually think it will be better for him to open the middle, but so be it. Pawn to e5. Now this pawn, as we can see, has these two pawns, giving him a space advantage, and they point like an arrow to the king side. So bishop takes e3 check. Not the best of decisions by black. Why? Because the knight was pinned anyway. It wasn't going anywhere. So he decides to double the pawns. Then bishop e6, certainly inferior. Poor move. Try to develop your pieces actively. Try to develop them so they have more options. And if we currently look, the bishop on this diagonal is sitting simply with this amount of squares. So it has 5 squares it can go to. When you develop a piece, you want to give it extra options. So by playing bishop e6, it still has the same 5 squares. It certainly would have been better to play the bishop to f5, looking on this diagonal and attempting to fight here. If you remember from the previous video, game 3, go back and check again how white, Collie, used this diagonal. We're going to see this diagonal pointing onto the king side. We're going to see the same thing in this one. The bishop jumps into d3, and here we get once again the weakening move, which, as we'll see, is not here a mistake. But black doesn't appreciate that when they play pawn h6, they are potentially weakening their king position. So here, this is a fine move. This is okay. But black does need to realize that right now they are moving a pawn in front of their rook. That's fine. But as we'll see, black later makes a mistake and castles, and then forgets they've made that hook, that weakness for white to use. So white does the right thing. White castles, and we get knight g to e7. When you're notating, and you have 2 knights that could go to the same square, or 2 rooks, or maybe if you're very, very, very lucky and you've got 2 queens, the way to notate it is simply to write the file that it came from. So in this case, knight g to e7. So here in this position, it's important for us to realize that white has a very nice space advantage. Why do we say that? Well, the center, they have 2 pawns in the middle. This pawn, particularly important on e5, takes away some nice squares that black would like to use. So black's pieces have a little bit less choices in this case because of that space. Now, it is not critical or out of control, but black does need to be careful finding good squares for their pieces. So let's talk about white. If you're playing white here, how do we take ourselves forward? What is it we should do? And this is a valuable moment for us to look and learn from, where when you're playing a game, how do we form plans? How do we come up with ideas? Now, the first thing to examine is that the black knight moving to e7, does it threaten anything? No, he's simply developing. So what should we do? The opponent's king is in the middle, but we cannot get to it because our own pawn is in the way. They have these pieces here protecting it. Well, a great tip to you. If you're looking for a plan, ask yourself, what is your worst placed piece? What is the piece doing the least? And in this case, white smartly finds a job for every piece and says, well, this rook on a1, it's not really contributing. But here we have a semi-open file. We've seen that in some of the earlier games. This is where none of the white pawns are on that file, so the rook has a free range where it can play. So now black says, well, I don't want to lose a pawn. They push b6. And then he finishes the mobilization. He says, I'm going to move my queen to d2. And here, everything is fine and good. And black now, as we could learn actually from game 2, with the center being closed, is not in a rush to castle. But black's not aware of that. And black makes this move, which is a substantial blunder. Castles. But how can this be? We're told so often. Castle early and castle often. Castle quickly. Get your king out of the middle. Hold on. Go back. Look at video for game 2. And examine in that one, from the black side, where the center was closed. The black king was not in danger. He did not need to castle. And as a matter of fact, He kept his king in the middle, and it was not a problem. Here, black makes a mistake by castling, because suddenly we see that pawn on h6, that is a target, a weakness. And they have stepped right into white's attack. Let's do that rule of three counting here. We can see that the bishop is pointing. We can see this bishop is pointing. We see the queen can contribute. The knight can contribute. Even this rook can join in. Wow. So many weapons. How many pieces could black defend with? We'll have a struggle. Their bishop has to try and use f5, or their knight has to try and use it, or the knight to g6. So this is a real problem. And this is where we can see immediately. I think already, if you've done the previous videos, you already have a good idea. White needs to break through on the king side, and they play bishop takes h6. What a brilliant sacrifice. And this is why it's so important to realize that castling here is a blunder, a mistake, because they've sent their king right into the danger. And we'll unpack here. Bishop takes h6, pawn takes, queen takes. Okay, white has sacrificed a piece. What do they have in return? Number one, the weakness of the black king. Number two, an immediate mate threat. Rather big deal. So in this position, they play knight g6, trying to defend. Fling the knight in the path here. And I want you to think again, how would you attack? What would you do if you were in this situation? Very valuable theme. Again, use the rule of three as a guide. Currently, black is defending with two pieces. Sorry, with one. We have a queen and a bishop. We need to bring another piece in. Big deal. There is the knight. It springs forth. Knight g5. Once again, reinforcing with a checkmate threat. This is a horrendous position for black. Their only way to defend is actually to give up their queen. They tried to play rook e8. Here's a wonderful little quiz. Checkmate in 2. How does white do it? Check, checkmate. I tricked you. It's checkmate in 3, really. So rook takes f7 is what he follows with. By all means, you could also go queen to f7 check, queen to h7 check, following with the rook taking here. So very, very strong in this position. He chooses to do it this way around. Rook takes. The opponent now has a problem. That's checkmate. That's checkmate. They took with the bishop. Same pattern. Check. King moves. Queen takes h7. This is an important little moment just to highlight. If you're doing a puzzle or a tactic, it's crucial to understand that in many cases, puzzles will say, no, there's one way to do it. But this is an example where rook takes f7 is mate in 3, or queen to h7 is mate in 3. So mate is mate. It's the same thing. And I would advise you in your games, as we've learned before, try to look at the checks first to guide you, because checks limit the opponent's responses. And that'll help you to find what is possible and what is important in your positions. So what a wonderful finish that we get to see here. A very quick victory. And if we just look at understanding what we can learn from this in this game situation, what you can take forward. Once again, we see that tool that you can look to use, the rule of 3. Remember, if you're not completely aware of the rule of 3, it says that if you want to successfully checkmate the enemy king, you should start your attack with 3 pieces, minimum. Why? Because here, look how there are 2 pieces working together to get checkmate. The queen delivers the check and the knight protects. So we say the rule of 3, 1 piece will make the weakness or take away the defender. Then the other 2 will deliver checkmate. And we see the rule of 3 playing through again and again in this attack absolutely wonderfully well. The first thing, if we take that moment backwards again, going across, we see how here, for us to deliver checkmate, the opponent is trying to run with their king away to f8. So what do we do to get this checkmate? We need to crash through on f7, but they have a defender, the bishop. So we sacrifice the rook. The rook is the 3rd piece. And that's very important. And I do want you to see that the rule of 3 is a wonderful guide for you, but it does not replace calculation. You still have to remember the basics of forcing moves. Checks first, then captures, then simple threats. So we see the rook destroys the safety of where the black king wanted to run to, and then the knight and the queen combine. And if we take a step back again, little bit back, Look at the rule of three. The bishop, dark squared bishop for white, sacrificed over here, setting up the checkmate. And now what do we have? Two pieces working together to threaten mate. Black here, in an attempt to save checkmate, sends their knight in the way. What do? Bring in a new piece in the situation. And in swings the knight to g5. And we continue to bring new weapons, new weapons. And that is so instructive. There is no rush from white here, fully understanding that they have so many pieces available on the king side. So you might ask, where was black's mistake? Castling, as strange as it was. By pushing the pawn to h6 and castling on that side, that was not a good idea. And that's why I've said to you previously, be very cautious about pushing pawns on your king side, because it might lead to problems here. So if you have any questions, any interests in some of these positions and some of the choices, the defenses that black could have adopted, put in the comments below. And then we'll continue on our exploration of these wonderful ideas we can look and learn from in the next video.